Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 3,500 years back in time. At that time, there was a man called Joshua who was a great example for me. His story is really exciting. Maybe you've heard the story of when Moses and the Israelites left Egypt. They started a long journey towards a country that God had promised to give them. And God could talk to Moses so that he knew exactly what to do on the way. The people experienced amazing miracles, like when God opened up the Red Sea for them. But strangely, the Israelites always started to complain and doubt God when things started getting hard. But Joshua was different. Just like Moses, he was always full of faith in God. Joshua quickly became one of the Israelites' most important warriors. He must have learned a lot from Moses. They set up camp before they came to the land of Canaan.
I have chosen you, 12 strong and brave chieftains, to spy out the land of Canaan for 40 days.
Of course, Joshua was one of the spies, and so was his friend, Caleb.
We will find out everything we need to know about the land God has given us.
No one was allowed to know why they were there, and they didn't give away their plans to anyone. The land was way better than they thought. It was green, with lots of farms, and plenty of food. They took lots of fruit, and a bunch of grapes that were so big that 2 men had to carry it between them. It was so fantastic that they said that
it is a land that flows with milk and honey.
But there was one big challenge in the land. One of the nations that lived there, the Anakim, were much bigger and much taller than anyone the spies had ever seen before.
Those people are actually giants.
Yeah, those cities are going to be really hard to take.
After 40 days, the spies came back to Moses and told what they had seen. Straight away, the people started doubting that God would help them. They didn't think that they would be able to enter the land. The other spies also started to doubt.
No, we can't just attack those people.
Yeah, all the men we saw there were big and strong.
We felt like grasshoppers compared to them. And they probably felt the same.
That only made things worse.
If only we had died in Egypt.
If only we could die here in the wilderness.
Why did God lead us to this land, to fall by the sword and for our wives and children to be taken captive by the enemy?
Imagine suddenly they wanted to go back to Egypt. Joshua, Caleb, and Moses knew that it's a sin to doubt God, and now the people were doing it again. But Joshua and Caleb were thinking differently. They were in a spirit of faith.
Listen, God will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land. They are no more than a piece of bread for us."
The Israelites became so angry that they wanted to kill Joshua and Caleb. Then God had to stop the people himself.
How long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I have performed among them.
But Moses loved the people of Israel and asked God to forgive them. And because Moses was a faithful man, God decided to listen. God would bring the people into the land, but not without punishment. Because the people of Israel didn't believe, God would let them wander in the wilderness for 40 years before they could enter Canaan. The Israelites should have listened to Joshua and Caleb instead of doubting God. But Joshua held on to his faith and never doubted God's word about the promised land. But we'll hear more about that in the next episode. See ya! Oh, hi there. Today, I'm taking you 3,500 years back in time. Finally, I can tell you the rest of the story about a hero in the Bible called Joshua. He is a huge example for me. As I told you last time, Joshua became the leader of the Israelites. He was supposed to lead them into Canaan, the land that God had promised them. First, they had to walk around in the wilderness for 40 years as a punishment for not believing in God. But Joshua and Caleb believed, and when God said he would give the people a country, then they were sure he would do it. After 40 years, God let them enter Canaan. So, they got ready and took the Ark of the Covenant with them. The chest you see here. This was the holiest and most important thing the Jews possessed. They had been told by God to make it in gold, and on the top of it, they should make a lid with 2 angels. God spoke to the Israelites in between these 2 angels. And there were several other sacred things that should lie inside this chest. And they had to bring this whole chest into Canaan. However, they got stopped by a huge river, the Jordan.
How on earth are we supposed to get the coffin over to the other side?
But Joshua already knew God's plan.
You must just walk straight over.
And the first thing they met was the city of Jericho. It was surrounded by a massive wall. The people who lived there had already heard that the Israelites would come. So Jericho was completely closed. No one came out and no one came in. But the Israelites had to defeat Jericho if they were going to keep going into Canaan. They set up camp and had to figure out how to take this city. A man with a raised sword suddenly stood before Joshua.
Wait! Are you one of us, or do you belong to the enemy? Neither. I am the chief of the Lord's army. I have arrived.
Joshua understood that he was a messenger sent by God.
What does my lord have to say to his servant?" "Take off your shoes, for the place where you stand is holy ground."
Now Joshua listened carefully. God had promised Joshua that the Israelites would take Jericho, but the way he was going to take the city was quite strange. This was not going to be an ordinary conquest of a city. That was for sure. The next morning, Joshua told the people what God had said.
"The priests are to carry the Ark of the Covenant and get ready to walk. 7 priests shall walk in front of the Ark and blow their horns. Armed men with weapons will walk at the front, and the rest of the people will follow at the very back. And one more thing, you must not say a word until I give the order."
And so, they walked in complete silence around the city once and went back to the camp. I can imagine many were wondering what Joshua was doing. The next morning, everyone got up early and walked quietly around the city, once, just as before. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they were going to take the city. But before they left, Joshua gave a warning to everyone.
"We will take the city, but no one is to take anything for himself. All treasures are to be given into the treasure store for God."
This day, they went around the city 7 times. And when the horns blew for the 7th time, all the people shouted as loud as they could. Then the miracle happened. The walls of Jericho fell. And the Israelites could walk right into the city. The battle was won because Joshua had led the people exactly as God had told him. He was always obedient to God, and in this way, they continued to take the rest of Canaan. God helped them drive out their enemies, and the Israelites can now live peacefully in their new home. Well, thanks for following along. I'll see you in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya! Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,700 years back in time. Today, I want to tell you one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's the story of the Israeli prophet Elisha. He always heard God's voice, so he often gave the king advice on his next moves. At that time, Israel was at war with the king of the Syrians.
"We will send our armies here, here, and over there. The Israelis will have no chance of escaping."
Elisha was always listening to God, and God told him everything their enemies had planned.
Your Majesty, beware of passing by this place, because the Syrians will go down there.
The Israeli king did as told, and their army escaped the Syrians several times.
Somebody must have told them. Tell me, who among us is snitching to the Israelis?
No one, Your Majesty. It's Elisha, the Israelite prophet, who tells Israel's king the words that you speak, even in your bedroom.
Go and find out where he is.
Your Majesty, I heard he is right here in this town.
Well, go and capture him.
Oh no! Master! Master! What will we do?
Oh, boy, don't be afraid. There are more of us than there are of them.
What do you mean? We're two, and they are, I don't know, thousands?
Come outside with me, boy. Dear Lord, please open his eyes so that he may see. Dear Lord, strike this nation with blindness.
What happened? And where is that prophet?
This isn't the right road or the right city. Follow me, and I'll lead you to the man you are looking for. Just follow my voice. Keep going.
But Elisha had another plan in mind. He brought them right up to the Israeli king.
Dear Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see.
What? Where are we? Wait, this is a trap.
Elisha, should I kill them? Should I?
No, don't kill them. Did you capture them with your own sword or bow? Do you have the right to kill them? Put food and water in front of them so they can eat and drink and return to their master.
All right then.
Oh man, this is so good. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers!
Thank you so much.
Have a great trip home.
Goodbye.
Bye!
Bye.
Yes, you know. And then they let us go straight home.
What? Really? With such generosity, we better stop harassing them.
After that, the Syrians no longer attacked Israel, so they could live in peace. And the cool part of the story is this. Elijah knew that God was always watching over him, but his servant couldn't see that right away. He only saw the enemies right in front of them. When God opened the boy's eyes, he could suddenly see the huge army sent from heaven, always watching over them. The same goes for us. Sometimes, the only thing we can see are the difficulties right in front of us. But if we let God open up our eyes, we get to see how He's always watching over us. He will strengthen those who love Him, so we don't have to fear anything. Thanks for following along with this episode. We'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya! Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,400 years back in time. In this episode, you'll meet a man called Nehemiah. He used to live in Israel, but had to move to Persia because his home was taken by the enemies. All of this had happened because the Israelites were disobedient to God. Now, Nehemiah served the Persian king as his cupbearer, which was quite an important job. He did his job well and was appreciated by the king. But he longed to get back home to Israel. Nehemiah loved his people and his country, but most of all, he loved God, who chose the Jews to be his people.
We have guests, Your Majesty. They've come from Israel, but they're not asking to see you, Your Majesty. They've come to see your cupbearer.
Of course. Go speak with your guests, Nehemiah.
Dear brother, what's going on?
Nehemiah, I came to tell you, the Jews left in Jerusalem are in big trouble. The wall around the city is broken down and the gates have been destroyed by fire.
But that means our holy city, it's open for all enemies to take. Lord, God of heaven, please listen to the prayer of your servant. We have wronged you greatly. We haven't kept the commandments you gave us. But remember the word that you gave Moses. If we are unfaithful, you will scatter us among the peoples. But if we keep your commandments, you will gather our people and bring us to the place that you have chosen. Lord, listen to the prayer of your servant and those who honor your name. Amen.
Tell me, why are you so sad, Nehemiah? You're not sick, so you must have a broken heart.
Long live the king. But why shouldn't I be sad when my home is in ruins and its gates destroyed by fire?
So, what do you need?
Well, if it pleases the king, please send me home so that I can rebuild the walls of Jerusalem.
Okay, hold on a second. So, usually a question like that could easily get a servant killed. But Nehemiah knew that God was with him. So, he knew he did the right thing. Okay, alright, keep going.
How long will you be away, and when will you return? I will give you every permission needed, and my best soldiers will join you.
Phew.
Why have you come here?
For a visit.
You can't enter.
Yes, I can. We have the king's permission. See? Let's check out the damage done to the wall. Listen, Jews, priests, officers and officials. You see the trouble that we're in. Jerusalem is in ruins, and its gates are destroyed by fire. Come on, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we won't continue to be in disgrace. The Persian king gives us everything we need. God will make us succeed.
Yes. Let's get this wall rebuilt.
I was wondering, why was it exactly Nehemiah that wanted to rebuild the wall? Because he lived all the way over in Persia. I think it was because he loved God so much. He couldn't just sit quietly and watch the holy city fall to ruins. He asked God for forgiveness of the sins of his people and promised to stay faithful. God saw that, and that's why he wanted to use Nehemiah. Next time, you'll see that it wouldn't be so easy to rebuild the wall. But because Nehemiah loved God and did as he commanded, God would help the Israelites in every situation. So, thanks for following along with this story, and we'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya! Hi there. Today, I'm taking you 2,400 years back in time. Finally, I can tell you the rest of the story of a man called Nehemiah. He was a Jew who had just returned to Jerusalem after his people had to flee the country. Because the Jews were disobedient to God, Jerusalem was burned down by their enemies. But Nehemiah loved his people and his country, and most of all, he loved God, who chose the Jews to be his people. So Nehemiah came back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem with his people. But not everybody was too happy about the building project going on. They had their own plans for Jerusalem.
Do they think they can fix things themselves? Do they think they can finish it in a day? Are they going to build the walls from the piles of rubble, even though they have been burned to the ground?
Even if a fox would climb on it, the wall would break.
But Nehemiah didn't listen to his negative neighbors. He just kept on working, trusting that God was with them.
Great work, everybody. We're halfway there already because you're working so hard.
But the wall is going to fall down. The stones are too broken. It's impossible to build.
Don't worry about it. God will support us in our work. It will succeed.
So the work on the walls is progressing, and the gaps are being closed. We have to do something.
Well, if we attack now, we can just walk through the gaps in the walls. Before they know it, we'll be inside the city to kill them and stop the work.
What a brilliant idea!
God had already warned Nehemiah about the attack. So they held guard day and night.
Everybody's very spread out along the wall. Listen, everybody. The enemy could attack at any moment. When you hear the trumpet sound, come and gather right here. Fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Remember, the Lord is great and powerful.
From this day on, the builders did their work with the load in one hand and a weapon in the other. And Nehemiah had everyone working on the lowest parts of the walls first.
They have found out. Their God has spoiled our plan. What a stupid idea you had. We'll have to try something else. A trap.
Dear Nehemiah, we have heard that the building project is going well, and that there are no gaps left in the wall. Great job. Let's meet together over here. Kind regards, your neighbors.
But they just want to trick me. No way I'm walking into their trap. Sorry, I have important work to do. I can't come over.
Can't come down? I have heard that you are building this wall just to rebel and become king yourself. Now, the king wants to hear about this. So come, let's talk together.
Huh? None of this is true. You're just making this up.
Why won't they come?
They tried tricking Nehemiah like this several times. But Nehemiah simply trusted God and kept on building the wall. and after just 52 days, the wall was finished.
But that's impossible. That kind of work could only be completed with the help of their god.
Who knows what else they're capable of?
I don't want to know.
You see, in order to get their city back, the Jews had to build and fight at the same time. But God was with them and gave them the city as promised. And the same goes for us. We're not building on an actual wall, but we have to guard our hearts in order to protect them from evil and keep them pure for God. Just as they were holding a load in one hand and a weapon in the other, we should always do the good and at the same time fight against evil. We have to watch especially out for weak spots where we know bad thoughts want to enter our hearts. With God's help, I can keep my heart pure and be a servant for God, just like Nehemiah. So thanks for following along with this story, and we'll see each other again in another episode of Bible Heroes of Faith. See ya!
David the Shepherd Boy. Early one morning, Simon and Sarah heard a loud knock on the door. Who could it be, they wondered.
Huh? I'm faster than you. Oh, Grandad, it's you!
Hello, you two. I've got a little surprise for you.
Yes!
Here you are.
What's all this? Is it someone's birthday?
It's a present from Grandad. Oh, wow, a sword! Great! I've got one too. Look at that! Yay!
Wow, how lucky are you?
I had some leftover wood in my workshop and I thought, now what could I make out of that?
Oh, Grandad, thank you. I love it. Me too. Thank you, Grandad. Now we can have sword fights, Simon. Come on, I challenge you. All right, but first you have to catch me.
Be careful, you two.
Simon, where are you? Ta-da! Gotcha! Now fight. All right. Watch out! Wow, you're fierce, but I'm not scared. Me neither. These are great swords, Grandad.
Here, sit down here and I'll tell you a story about a young boy in the Bible who had a lot of courage for fighting.
Yes, please, Grandad. We love your stories.
Well, this boy's name was David. And when he was young, his job was to be out in the fields, like these, watching over his father's sheep. Now, in those days, lions and bears lived in the woods and fields where the sheep were grazing, and sometimes a bear or a lion would pounce on a baby lamb or sheep and kill it.
Oh no!
But David really cared about the sheep and the lambs. The only weapon he had was his sling, not a sword like yours.
There you go.
But he used his sling on anything else he could lay his hands on. A stone, branch of a tree, and he stood and fought off any wild animal that tried to come near his sheep.
That was a really brave thing to do. He could have been attacked himself.
Yes. But even though he was young, he had the courage to fight for what is good, and he never doubted that God would help him, whatever happened.
The sheep and the lambs were too small to fight for themselves, but he fought for them.
Yes. Then one day, David was asked to go and take some food to his older brothers. who were soldiers fighting a battle against an enemy of Israel. When he got to the camp, he saw that all the soldiers were frightened of a great giant of a man in the enemy camp.
Cowards of Israel! Choose one of your men to fight me!
Even though they had all their armor on and swords in their hands, they were still afraid. David felt angry. He knew it was wrong that this giant was attacking God's people and making them afraid. He offered to fight him himself.
I will fight.
What's this?
You come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord.
He was too young to have a soldier's armor or weapons.
That's right. So he had to use what he had. He found some stones and picked one to put in his sling.
Ha!
And hurled it at the giant.
Yeah!
It hit the giant so hard that he fell down and died. David knew that God had power to help him in any danger, just as he had delivered him when he fought off the wild animals and defended the sheep.
Wow, he was so brave. Yes, but he did really put his trust in God.
Well, there aren't any lions or bears around in the fields these days, but we can still put our trust in God and fight for what's right.
On guard! Hey, that's my sword you've got, Derek.
David and Jonathan. It was a busy day for Simon and Sarah. Simon had gone out fishing with his friend Caleb. Back at home, Sarah's friend, Esther, had come around to play. The girls had been trying on each other's dresses and having fun.
Look at me!
Look at me! I can make my dress swell. Whee!
Look, Esther! I've got a ribbon. It's my favourite. Grandma gave it to me.
You're lucky. I haven't got anything to put in my hair.
Sarah, time to go to Grandma's.
Oh, right.
It was nearly time for Esther to go home because Sarah was going out to Grandma and Granddad's house for tea.
I'm so glad I've got a friend like you, Sarah.
Me too. And let's be friends forever.
Yes, let's.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon.
See you soon.
Hello, Grandma. Oh, hi, Derek.
Hi, dear. How pretty you girls look in your dresses. Come in. Simon's here already. Here we are, children. Have some of my freshly made cake.
I love coming to yours for tea, Grandma. Yes, thank you, Grandma. Oh, this looks delicious. I'm starving.
So, you two were playing with your friends today. I'm sure you had fun. Would you like me to tell you a Bible story about one of the greatest friendships ever?
Oh yes, please, Grandma.
Do you remember David, the shepherd boy, and how brave he was? Well, he was also good at playing the harp. One day, he was asked to come to the palace and play the harp for the king. When he got to the palace, he found out that the king, whose name was Saul, was tormented with bad moods. But whenever David played the harp for him, he felt better. King Saul had a son called Jonathan, who was a soldier who had fought bravely for his country.
That's just what David did too. He was brave when he stood up against Goliath.
Yes, Jonathan could see that David was a man who wanted to fight for the good. They became firm friends. David stayed at the palace and played the harp for the king. But after a while, the king asked him to go and fight in some battles. Jonathan had great respect for his friend David, and he cared for him as much as he cared for himself. Before he left for the battles, Jonathan gave David his own sword and his armor to help protect him. What is it, Sarah?
Oh, nothing. I just wish I gave something to my friend Esther today.
Well, David was a great warrior, and he won many battles. When he got back to the palace, King Saul heard how many battles David had won. And instead of being pleased with him, he became very jealous of David. His bad moods came back, and in his rage, he threw a spear at David and tried to kill him.
Oh no!
Jonathan was shocked that his father, the king, could do such a thing. Jonathan wasn't jealous of David at all, only happy for his success. He tried to tell the king what a good man David was, and the king listened for a while.
Kill him!
But then he tried to kill David again, so David had to escape from the palace and run for his life. He ran far away from the palace and hid from the king.
What happened in the end, Grandma?
Well, Saul hated David, and he carried on searching for him because he wanted to kill him. So David had to stay in hiding for a long time. But Jonathan was always his true friend, no matter what his father thought. David and Jonathan made a promise to be friends forever. Then, one day, a messenger came to tell David that Jonathan and his father, King Saul, had been killed in a battle.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yes, it was very sad news for David. But ever after, David always remembered Jonathan as his very best friend. And what made Jonathan such a good friend, do you think?
Well, he was never jealous of David when he became such a good soldier. And he didn't stop being his friend, even if it meant making his father, the king, very angry.
And he was kind to David when he gave him his sword and armor.
Yes, that's right. It's so good to have true friends like that.
Oh, Derek.
Simon, wait here. I just want to do something. Esther, I want to give you my ribbon. What? Really? You said you didn't have one when we were playing earlier. So, I'd like you to have mine. Here, you have it. Oh, there. It looks so nice on you. It's yours. Friends forever.
The children we are about to meet are curious about a very special book called the Bible. You may have heard of it before. This book is about people who lived and believed in God thousands of years ago. They were called heroes of faith. There's also a lot about Jesus, who came down to earth to help us people. Now, the children will explore the Bible in more detail. Can it help them too?
Hi. Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
I'm so excited about today's verse.
Oh, yes.
Let's spin the fortune wheel. I think it will be yellow.
I think it will be blue.
No, it's red.
It's going to be page 1089.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Blessed? What does that mean?
And what does it mean to have a pure heart?
To be blessed simply means being as happy as you can be.
Oh yeah.
And everyone who has a pure heart becomes like that.
Oh, I get it.
Having a pure heart means choosing the good. What you know inside is the right thing to do.
Oh, like don't talk badly about anyone else, for example?
That's right. And now you will hear about a man named Joseph. He is one of the heroes of faith of the Old Testament and an example in exactly that, keeping a pure heart. Joseph was the son of Jacob, and he was the second youngest of 12 brothers. They lived in the land of Canaan, which is Israel today. Jacob was particularly fond of Joseph, something his older brothers were jealous of. In addition, Joseph had some strange dreams. In the dreams, he stood in the middle with his brothers around him. Suddenly, they bowed to him, a bit like servants bowing to their king. Joseph dreamed this several times and in slightly different ways. But the message in the dreams was always the same. Joseph thought this was very strange, and he told his brothers what he had dreamed. They became angry. "We will never bow to him," they said to one another. "Who does he think he is?" They were so angry that one day they decided to get Joseph. Now he was going to feel their rage. They threw him into a well. The well had no water in it, but it was not possible to get out of it alone. Joseph must have been very scared. After a while, a group of men came up riding. They were on their way to Egypt, a country far away. Then the brothers came up with the idea that they could sell Joseph as a slave. You could do that at that time. Then they would probably get rid of him forever. We do not know what Joseph thought as he went the long way to Egypt. But Joseph loved God with all his heart, trusting that God would help him, and God did. When Joseph came to Egypt as a slave, he was sold on to a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was the commander of the bodyguards of Pharaoh in Egypt. Potiphar realized that God took care of Joseph, that he was a very special man, and he did a good job. Where Joseph was, everything became good and safe, for God blessed Joseph. Potiphar therefore became fond of him and gave him much responsibility in his house. But Potiphar's wife was not a kind lady. Once she tried to tempt Joseph to be with her. Joseph knew that that was very wrong, both against Potiphar, who had been so kind to him, and to God. Joseph wanted to keep his clean heart, so he answered her, "How could I do this great evil, to sin against God?" Potiphar's wife became so angry that she took Joseph's robe and told her servants and her husband that Joseph had tried to be with her. Of course it was a lie, but Potiphar believed in his wife, and Joseph ended up in prison. Joseph was in prison for the second time, even though he was completely innocent. But the fact that he would not do the great evil to sin against God kept his heart clean. He did not let into his heart either hatred or evil thoughts towards those who had been bad to him. Therefore God continued to be close to Joseph. He blessed him in prison, so everyone was happy with him, even the prison chief. There are also 2 prisoners who had been Pharaoh's servants. they began to have some strange dreams. They were bothered by the dreams and thought that they had to mean something. They went to Joseph, and since God was with him, Joseph understood the meaning of the dreams. He told them they meant that one of the servants would die and the other would return to Pharaoh's palace. It turned out to be true. The servant who returned to Pharaoh soon forgot Joseph and the dream. But a few years later, Pharaoh began to have dreams. Again and again, he dreamed a dream he did not understand. But since the dream kept coming back, Pharaoh realized that it had to mean something, a kind of divine message. Then his servants suddenly remembered Joseph, who was in prison. Joseph had interpreted his dream. Maybe he could interpret Pharaoh's dreams too. Joseph immediately understood what Pharaoh's dreams meant. God showed him. He told Pharaoh that God had sent them a warning that there would be 7 good years in Egypt, where the fields and animals would provide them with plenty of food. But there would come 7 bad years, with drought and little food and water. In the first 7 years, therefore, the Egyptians had to save food and grain for the 7 bad years. That way, they could survive. Pharaoh had never experienced a man like Joseph. He said, "Since God has let you know all this, no one is as wise and understanding as you. You will govern my house, and whatever you say, all the people will obey it." Joseph became head of all Egypt. Only Pharaoh was above him. Because of Joseph's pure heart, God could use him to save all of Egypt from a terrible famine. But something else also happened, for there was also drought and little food in Canaan, where Joseph really came from. His brothers therefore travelled to Egypt to obtain food. Joseph immediately recognized them, but they did not know who he was. As they bowed to him, as servants bow to their king, Joseph remembered the dream he had had when he was young. Joseph forgave his brothers. Now he could save his whole family, and finally got to see his father again. What his brothers had done with evil, had God turned to the good.
Wow, what a story. It really pays to choose the good and take care to have a pure heart.
Jesus has many wonderful things he wants to teach us, all of which we find in the Bible. After Leo inherited his grandfather's old Bible, do you think he and his friends want to find out more about what is in this book? Can they find something here that can help them too, as Grandpa experienced?
Hi, have you started already? I didn't want to leave school until my big sister was ready to come with me.
You just made it. We weren't going to begin without you.
Now we are going to spin the Wheel of Fortune.
I think it will be yellow.
I bet it will be blue.
Thanks.
There you go.
And it's page 1364.
Something is underlined here.
Yes, it's written here. Do not be anxious about anything, but bring everything on your heart to God. Pray and call on him with thanksgiving.
There were several words I didn't understand.
Don't be anxious. Does it mean to not be afraid?
What else was there? Bring everything on your heart to God. Pray and call on him with thanksgiving.
You're quite right. Not to be anxious is the same as not being afraid of what is going to happen or how to get something done. Everything that I have in my heart, what I think about, I can tell God and Jesus about. Then we do not have to worry about things. We trust Jesus that everything will turn out well. Jesus loves to help us. The Bible is full of stories of people who have asked God for help and received it. Now you're going to hear the story of a very special lady. Her name is Esther. In a country called Persia, there once lived a king. He wanted a beautiful queen. It was therefore decided that all the most beautiful young women in the country should be sent to the castle. Then the king could choose a wife. In the castle, where the beautiful women were to live, a man named Mordecai worked. He was a Jew, but had come to the country as a prisoner of war. He worked in the castle, and he was a good man. Mordecai had a young cousin who became an orphan as a child. She was named Esther and had grown up with Mordecai. He was very fond of her and treated her like a daughter. Now Esther had become a young and very beautiful woman, and she was one of those who moved into the castle so that the king could meet her. Before she left, Mordecai asked Esther not to tell anyone that she was a Jew. In Persia, it was dangerous to say you were a Jew, and Mordecai didn't want Esther to be hurt. Esther had become a wise lady, and she did not reveal to anyone that she was a Jew. There were a lot of new things she had to learn in the castle, and she could easily have been scared of what awaited her. But Esther believed in God and knew that she could pray to him for help and advice. The ladies of the castle were to visit the king one by one. When it was Esther's turn, she was dressed in the finest clothes, and she was amazingly beautiful when she went in to see the king. He immediately fell in love with her, and soon after, he chose her to be queen. Becoming a queen was a great task and honour, but it was also a little scary, because a queen always had to behave just right, or else she could be punished. It was the king who had all the power. Many important people worked in the castle. The most important of them was a man named Haman. He had a lot of power, and the king relied heavily on him. The others in the castle, and in the palace where Esther had lived, were probably a little afraid of Haman. No one would speak to him, and if he passed them, they would bow as deeply as they could. Haman passed by where Mordecai worked. Since Mordecai was a Jew, he believed in God and would not therefore bow to Haman as if Haman were a god. Haman immediately noticed this and became very angry. In fact, he became so angry that he decided to punish Mordecai. But he decided he would not just punish Mordecai, but all Jews throughout Persia. So he made a plan to get the king to kill all the Jews throughout the great kingdom. He went in to see the king and said, "In your kingdom live a people who keep to themselves. They have other laws than all other peoples, and they do not obey the king's laws." Haman made the king believe that the Jews did not obey the laws of the land and that they would cause trouble. Kings could not accept such a thing at that time. The king therefore wrote a law that all the Jews in the kingdom should be killed, and that it should happen on a certain day quite soon. When Mordecai heard this news, he was completely distraught. The other Jews also heard about it, and everyone cried and prayed to God. Soon Queen Esther also heard about it. She sent her servant to talk to Mordecai, and Mordecai asked the servant to tell the queen that she had to go to the king and ask for mercy for the Jews. "No, I can't," Esther said. "Everyone knows that if anyone enters the king's rooms without being invited, then they're killed, even the queen. Only if the king reaches out his golden rod do you get to live." But Mordecai pleaded with Esther again, saying, "If you do not go into the king, you will have to die anyway, for all Jews will be killed, and you are also a Jew. Maybe you became queen just for this moment, to save your people." Then Esther realized that she had to be brave. Maybe God would use her to save the Jews. She asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in the city, and that for 3 days and nights they should pray to God that he would save them and let them live. Esther would do the same in the castle. Then after 3 days, she would go in to see the king. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her finest clothes. Then she went to the king's castle. Maybe the king would get angry, maybe not. Now she had prayed to God for 3 days, and she knew that God was with her and would help her. She continued to walk until she stood before the king's throne. She waited. The king smiled at her and held out his gold rod. Esther came forward and touched the staff. She was allowed to live. In the days that followed, Queen Esther met the king several times, and finally she explained to the king what misfortune the Jews had come to, and that she too could be killed because of the law Haman had made the king decide. The king was completely horrified. He had no idea what he had done. He asked Esther for help in making a new law, a law that saved the Jews. The vicious Haman received the most severe punishment, and Mordecai was hired as the king's chief servant. The fact that Queen Esther prayed to God was what gave her strength to save her people.
She was so brave.
Or maybe she wasn't really that brave by personality, but she prayed to God and he made her brave. And then God saved them. It's amazing. We never have to be afraid. We can pray about absolutely everything.
What can we learn from the heroes of faith that are written about in the Bible, and what does Jesus want to say to us? Leo has inherited his grandfather's old Bible, and now he and his friends want to find out more about this book. The Bible explorers are on the case.
Do you remember what we spoke about yesterday, that we should do something nice with our brothers and sisters instead of arguing?
Yes, I actually had a really nice time with my little brother yesterday. It works really well.
Not for me. I was trying to be kind, but straight away I got angry with my younger sister over a tiny thing. I didn't manage to be kind to her at all.
Did you give up?
Yeah, I don't think I can manage it, to be kind to my irritating younger brothers and sisters.
But how about we spin the wheel of happiness? And maybe we'll get something that will help for this very thing. It's 1093. Can I have the book?
Yes, here.
Ask and you will receive. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened for you. For he who asks receives, and he who seeks will find. And he who knocks, it will be opened for him. Matthew 7:7-8.
It says here that it is Jesus saying, so it must mean something very important.
That's completely true. These words do come from Jesus himself, and that is also something that you children can learn a lot from. It means, quite simply, that Jesus wants us never ever to give up. If there's something that we need, we have to pray for it. When he talks about seeking and knocking, he's talking about when there's something we don't understand or can't figure out. Then we mustn't give up. Those who hold out are the ones God will help. Jesus promises that. There is one particular story from the Old Testament about a man who never gave up. His name was Jacob. The story about him begins with his grandfather Abraham. Abraham was a very special man who always trusted in God. Therefore, God promised Abraham that he would be blessed and that his family would be a chosen nation, God's own special people. This blessing from God was inherited by Abram's son Isaac. And Isaac was supposed to give that blessing onto his son, and this is where the story about Jacob begins, as he was Isaac's son. Jacob had a twin brother who was called Esau. Esau was born first. In other words, he was the firstborn. As a result, it was Esau who was supposed to inherit Abraham and Isaac's blessing. Esau had what was called a birthright. That's how it was in those days. The eldest son was the one who would inherit. The twins were very different, both as children and as adults. Esau was a bit rough, while Jacob was calm and liked to stay close to tents where they lived. One day, Esau came home from hunting, starving, hungry and tired. He couldn't get something to eat quickly enough and asked Jacob if he could have his food. Jacob considered this. "You can have my food if you give me your birthright," he said. Esau obviously cared little about the blessing that he should inherit, because he did just that. He gave Jacob his inheritance to get food in return. He had agreed to let Jacob inherit from Abraham and Isaac and continue the family line. Their father, Isaac, did not find out about what had happened as Jacob kept it a secret. But when Isaac became old, almost blind, and knew he had only a short time left to live, he called Isaac to him to give him the blessing. But first he wanted Esau to go out hunting for some good meat, so that he could have a proper meal. Then he would bless him. Esau said nothing about how he had actually given away the birthright to Jacob. He went out hunting to do as his father said. But Jacob found out about what was going to happen. He understood that he had to act quickly. When Esau had left to go hunting, Jacob's mother helped him make a good meal for his father. Isaac was almost blind, and so he wasn't able to see that it was Jacob who had come to him and not Esau. But Esau had very hairy arms, so Jacob put some animal furs on along with Esau's clothes. This way he could smell like Esau and look more like him. Then he went in to see his father, served him food, and Isaac blessed him. When Esau came home and realized that the blessing had already happened, it dawned on him what he had done. He'd sold his birthright in return for food, and now it was Jacob who would continue the family line. Esau was so angry that he decided he would kill Jacob. Jacob had to run away, and he left as quickly as he could. He had some relatives in a place far away, and it was there that he would run to. But it was a long and tiring journey. One night, when he lay down to sleep out in the wilderness, he had an amazing dream. He dreamt that he saw a ladder that went right up to heaven. At the top was God, and he spoke to Jacob. He gave him promises for the future, that he would be with him and that God would not leave him until he had done what he had promised. Jacob knew that what he saw and heard in the dream was from God, and he trusted in what God had said to him. Jacob arrived at his relative's house and settled in. He worked for a man called Laban. Laban had a daughter that Jacob became very fond of. Her name was Rachel, and Laban agreed to let Jacob take her as his wife, if he worked 7 years for him first. After 7 years of hard work, the wedding day came. But then Laban did something very mean. Instead of letting Jacob have Rachel as his wife, he sent his eldest daughter Leah to the wedding. Laban said that if he wanted Rachel as well, he would have to work for 7 more years. Jacob liked Rachel so much that he didn't see any other option than to do as Laban said. Despite being tricked by Laban, Jacob continued to do a very good job for him. But after that, Jacob knew that he could not trust his father-in-law. The only thing Jacob could trust in was God. God helped him so that after a while he had many animals and a good amount of money, while Laban couldn't understand how he had achieved this. Eventually he had built up so much wealth that he could leave Laban and travel back to where he came from. Without saying anything to his father-in-law, he gathered his family and all his animals and left. When Laban realized, he became furious. He went out after them to catch them. But at night, when he had to rest, he had a dream. God came to him and warned him not to attack Jacob. Laban was scared by the dream, and when he found Jacob, he didn't dare to do anything bad to him. Instead, they set up a peace pact, and Jacob was allowed to travel on with his family unhindered. Over the course of several years, Jacob had first run away from his brother and then worked for an unrighteous and dishonest father-in-law. Now he longed for the blessing that God had promised him, that he could live safe with his family in the land that God had given them. But there was one thing that made Jacob uneasy. How was it with Esau? Was he still in the homeland, and was he still angry? Maybe he would attack them. That night, something amazing happened. While the others slept, Jacob went to spend some time alone. Then a man appeared and wrestled with him through the whole night. Jacob would not give in and fought so hard that the man eventually touched Jacob's hip and dislocated it. Jacob realized that the man he was fighting with was God himself. That's why he wouldn't give up. And whilst he struggled to hold on, he said to God, "I will not let you go until you've blessed me." And then God said to him, "You will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have fought with God and man and won." Then God blessed Jacob. The blessing Jacob received was realized even by the next day. Esau came to meet them. But instead of attacking, he ran towards Jacob, hugged him, and wept. He was no longer angry, and he didn't want to cause Jacob any harm. Then a new time began for Jacob. After all these years, God blessed him, giving him freedom and peace. Because Jacob held out and continued to believe in God, God blessed him and was with him for the rest of his life.
He never gave up. Seek and you will find. Knock and it'll be open for you. I also want to do that. To not give up. Jesus will help me so that I can do the good.
The Bible explorers have already discovered that the Bible can teach us so many important things. It can teach us how to live the way Jesus did and be just as happy as him. The children have probably never dreamed how exciting the Bible actually is, and now they are ready to find out even more.
Today, I'm excited about what verse we will get. Leo, can't we just start?
Yes. Fine by me. Are you ready?
Yes! I wonder what it says.
Lucas, can you read it this time?
Do not repay evil with evil, or insult with insult. Instead, you must bless. For you yourself are called to receive a blessing.
To repay evil with evil. I have heard that is to be mean back when someone is mean to you.
Insult against insult. Maybe that means bad words. Not to say bad words back. If someone says something bad to me.
Instead, you must bless. For you are called to receive a blessing. To bless someone is to do good to someone.
Yes, to get a blessing is to get something good. It means that we should do good to others because we are called, chosen in a way, to experience good done to us too.
That's absolutely right. You children do understand a lot more than you think. God wants to bless us, that is, to do good to us. Since God has called us to this, shouldn't we bless those around us? Don't repay meanness by being mean back. In the Old Testament, there is a story that is a very good example of exactly that. David was a young man who grew up with many older brothers. He was a shepherd boy and looked after his father's animals. At that time in Israel, there was a prophet named Samuel. A prophet is someone who hears God's voice and tells the people what God says. One day, the prophet Samuel came to David's family's home. Samuel had a very important mission. The king of Israel, Saul, had not been faithful to God. He had committed some serious sins. Therefore, God didn't want Saul to continue to be king. God rejected him. It was the prophet Samuel who received this message from God. And now God wanted Samuel to bless and anoint a new man, one who could become king in the future. God sent Samuel to David's family. First of all, David's father fetched the oldest brothers. But Samuel looked at them and thought, no, none of these has been called by God to be king. In the end, they brought David from the fields, although none of the others thought that God would have chosen him. When Samuel saw the young man, he knew it at once. David was the right one. One day, he would become king of Israel. He was called by God to be king. When Samuel had anointed David, he received the Spirit of God. King Saul had had it until then, but now he had lost it. Instead, Saul was filled with dark thoughts. No one knew what Samuel had done, because after the blessing, David continued his life as before. He was a shepherd boy, and Saul was still king. As a shepherd boy, David did everything to take good care of his animals. Both a lion and a bear attacked his sheep. But David put his trust in God and fought against them. With his sling, he killed the wild animals and kept the sheep safe. But there was something else David could do, and that was to play the harp. He was very good at it. Since King Saul had been filled with dark thoughts, he had had many bad days. His servants came up with the idea that they could get the king a harp player. Maybe it would get him into a better mood. One of them knew about David and made him come to the palace. Listening to David play the harp helped King Saul, and he liked David. And that's how David first came to King Saul's palace. Then there was a war in the land, and David went to the war zone to take food to his brothers who were soldiers. When he was there, he saw that the enemy had a giant, and this giant was named Goliath. He often came towards them, bullying the Israelites and mocking God. No one dared fight against him, for he was huge. Then David decided he would fight Goliath. David's brothers just laughed at him. They didn't think he had a chance. But David believed that God, who had helped him fight against bears and lions in the fields, could also help him against this giant. He went to King Saul and asked for permission to fight. The king thought he was too young and weak, but eventually he agreed. Then David got ready to go up against Goliath. He picked up some smooth stones from the stream and put them in his sling. As Goliath approached, David put a stone in the sling and threw it at Goliath. The stone hit him right in his forehead, so he died instantly. When the Israelite soldiers saw what was happening, they got faith and hope that God would enable them to win the war. They attacked and won a great victory. The king was impressed with David. and wanted him to stay in his palace, as well as taking part in future wars for Israel. David served the king faithfully, and in war he was braver than anyone else, leading Israel to ever new victories. King Saul should have been happy with all that David had done for him and the country, but instead he began to be envious. He was afraid that the people of the land would begin to like David better than himself. David did everything he could to be good to Saul, but Saul's attitude just got worse and worse. One day, when David was playing the harp for him, Saul threw a spear at him. But David managed to duck out of the way. Then the king began to send David on the most dangerous war missions so he might get killed. But David won all the battles he went into. The king realized that God was with David, and that made him even more angry and envious. David now realized that he had to run away from the king so that he wouldn't be killed. He had to say goodbye to his loved ones and escape, not knowing if he would ever see them again. David didn't talk badly about the king to anyone, and he didn't take revenge. But he ran away and made sure to keep his distance. He also had some friends who accompanied him. King Saul was so determined to kill David that he pursued him with his army. But God made sure Saul didn't reach David. Saul was told that enemies were attacking his land, and so he had to leave and go off to fight this enemy. But as soon as the battle was over, Saul brought with him 3,000 men to take up the hunt after David again. David had been hiding in a castle in the mountains, and the king heard rumours about it. As the king approached, David hid in a cave with his friends. Then it happened that Saul went to this cave alone, not knowing that David and his men were there. He wanted to spend some time alone. David's men saw him coming and told David that now they had the chance. Now they could kill the evil King Saul. David was surprised that they could say something like that. He couldn't imagine killing the king. He spoke strictly to his men, saying they were not allowed to touch Saul. But without Saul noticing it, David crept up and cut off a piece of the king's robe. Even this David found really hard to do because he didn't want to hurt Saul at all. When Saul went out of the cave and down the mountain again, David followed and cried out to him, "Lord, King!" Saul looked back, and David bowed his face to the ground and threw himself down. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen to people who say I'm trying to hurt you? Today you've seen with your own eyes that the Lord led you into my hands in the cave. The men told me to kill you, but I spared you because I thought, I will not lay hands on my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Look here, I have a corner of your robe in my hand. If I had cut off the corner of your robe without killing you, then you must realize and understand I have no evil or betrayal in mind. But you are after me, and you want to kill me." When David had said this to Saul, the king said, "Is it you speaking, my son David?" And then he began to cry, and he said to David, "You are better than I, for you have done good to me, even though I've done evil to you. Today you have shown me how good you are to me. You did not kill me when the Lord had given me into your hand. Who is there who meets his enemy and lets him get away in peace? May the Lord reward you for what you have done to me today. Now I know that you will become king and hold the kingdom of Israel in your hand." Saul returned home after the incident. But once again he set out to persecute David. And once again a similar incident happened in which David saved Saul's life, even though he could have killed him. David did not repay evil with evil. He continued to choose the good and left it to God to take care of Saul. Not long after that, King Saul died in war, and then David became king.
and he became a good king for Israel.
David never repaid evil with evil. Instead, he did the good.
He was called to be blessed by God. Therefore, he chose to bless those around him too. So can we.
Grandad's old Bible has become an exciting discovery for Leo and his friends. It's incredible that something which was written several thousand years ago still works. The reason for this is because God's word is true and God is the same now as he always was. Today, the children are ready to explore even more.
I am curious about one thing. There are people we read about in the Bible who are called heroes of faith. What does that actually mean? Heroes of faith.
The fact that they were heroes, that's easy to understand. They did things that were very brave and saved many others.
But were they superhumans? And that's why they were always so brave?
Well, I am not as brave as them, that's for sure. So I don't think I can become a hero like them.
You guys, can't we just get the verse of the day? Maybe we can get something that can give us an answer to that.
1,415. Exactly what I guessed.
What does it say?
All things are possible for those who believe.
Possible for those who believe. That only has to mean one thing. That nothing is impossible if you believe. Those people we've read about, the heroes of faith, they were heroes because they believed in God.
Absolutely. Because they believed, they became heroes. Nothing is impossible for God. And when a person chooses to believe with all his heart, then God can use that person for big things. And now you're going to hear some exciting stories about this. You've probably heard about Moses, who received a task from God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. To begin with, he was scared to take on the task because he didn't think he was good enough, brave enough, to do it. But God said to him he should do it, and God would be with him. So Moses believed God. Even before they had been let out of Egypt, there were many things Moses had to trust God for and hope that he would sort out for them, and God did. He performed miracles, and in the end, Pharaoh had to let them go. All of the Israelites prepared to leave. Thousands of people started to walk into the desert. At last, they weren't going to be slaves for the Egyptians anymore, and they could go back to the land that God had promised them. The Israelites were so happy. Full of courage and joy they went, until they arrived at the shores of the Red Sea. They set up camp there. After a long journey, they looked forward to a good rest. But suddenly, something happened. They could hear the sound of galloping hooves, and a cloud of dust rose up behind the hill. The army of Pharaoh was approaching. Pharaoh regretted that he had let them go, and now he wanted to kill them. The Israelites were petrified. They called out to Moses, full of fear and dread. Why did Moses bring them out here in the desert just to die? Moses looked up to heaven. Now God had to help him. Because Moses didn't understand how to deal with this situation with this army, but Moses did not doubt, and he said to his people, "Do not be afraid. Stand fast, and you will see how God will deliver you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you." God didn't fail him. He spoke to Moses and said, "Tell the children of Israel to go forward." You shall lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall walk on dry ground through the midst of the sea. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they come after you, and I will show my glory to Pharaoh and his army. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. Moses went towards the sea. This vast sea was in front of him, glittering in the moonlight. Was it here his people were going to walk through the water completely dry and safe? He lifted his rod and held it over the water, and suddenly an east wind came. The sea started to divide. The waters rose up several meters high, either side of Moses. The Israelites could not believe their eyes. Amazed at God's power, they walked through the sea as God had said. An angel of God delayed the army of Pharaoh so they couldn't overtake them. The Israelites made it safely to the other side. The army galloped after them, but they shouldn't have done that, because the sea came in right on top of them and devoured them all. The Israelites were safe. They thanked God that he had saved them. Because of Moses' faith, they were all saved. If we look further in the Bible, we come to another story I also would like to tell you about. That is the story about three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These three lived in Babylon. They were also Israelites, but had come to Babylon as prisoners of war. Even though they were far away from home, they hadn't forgotten what they had learned at home about God and his laws. They believed in God with all their hearts and did not let themselves be influenced by the idolatry which was common in Babylon. But one day, the king, whose name was Nebuchadnezzar, had a massive gold statue made as an idol. Now he wanted everyone in the country to bow down and worship this idol every time someone blew on a musical instrument. If they didn't, the king would throw them into a fiery furnace. The people were terrified of going against the king, so they did as he told them to. If they had heard an instrument playing, they dropped to their knees and worshipped. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not do it. They believed in God, who was the only God. To worship something else would be a betrayal against God, so they refused. Pretty soon, someone went to the king and told him about them. The king was furious and asked his soldiers to bring the three friends to him immediately. The king shouted at them and said that next time they heard the sound of a flute or a horn, they should immediately bow down to the statue. Otherwise, he would throw them into the fiery furnace. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "We do not need to respond to this. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden statue." Now the king became so furious, he almost couldn't control himself. He shouted at him that he would have his soldiers make the furnace 7 times hotter, so they would suffer a terrible death. So he got his soldiers to tie the men and dragged them towards the furnace. The soldiers threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the flames. It was so hot that the soldiers themselves collapsed outside the furnace. The king sat on the throne, pleased with himself. He thought, they got what they deserved. But suddenly his smirk disappeared and he turned white with shock. In the furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had stood up. They were no longer tied up, and there was a fourth person standing in the midst of them. A person the king had never seen before and who hadn't been thrown into the fire with the others. He looked like a son of God. They were walking around freely in the furnace, and the fire didn't hurt any of them. The king ran towards the furnace. He called out to them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, You servants of God, the Almighty, come out here. The men walked out of the furnace and stood in front of the king. The king realized that they served a God who was real, who was alive, and had all power. King Nebuchadnezzar didn't want to hurt them anymore, but instead made sure they lived safely in the land and that no one mocked the God they served. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego believed in God, and he rewarded them. And therefore, we can read about them today.
I want to believe as well, because everything is possible for those who believe.
Then God can use us too, even though we are young.
Yes!
Leah, Michael and Lily have gone on holiday to Grandpa's. That's the best thing ever. Grandpa is so kind and they have fun all day long. But the nicest thing is in the evenings when they sit down in front of the fire. Grandpa always has something exciting to tell them. Then the children can get answers to even more questions about the Bible. For they are, after all, Bible explorers.
Are marshmallows good in cocoa?
Yes, they're the best, but you must have at least 3.
At our house, there's always bickering about the last one.
About marshmallows? We're always arguing about sitting in the best place.
Bickering, yes. That sounds familiar. But there's a verse in the Bible where Jesus actually makes a very great promise to those that don't argue.
Really? Can you show us?
Yeah.
Yes. It's in chapter 5 of Matthew, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God.
Is it Jesus who says that?
Yes, it is.
But what does it mean to be a child of God?
Well, it's the greatest thing that can happen to a human being. If I'm a child of God, then God will take care of me. He will give me everything I need, and I will have eternal life with him and Jesus. So God's children, they're blessed.
But it's not so easy to be someone who creates peace. Not at home, at least.
I want to tell you a story about someone called Samuel, because I think that story can teach us something about this.
Oh yes, great.
The story begins with a lady named Hannah. She was married, but the years passed and she had no children. She was very sad. She wanted so much to have a baby. In her house, there was another lady who also lived there and she had children. But instead of being grateful for that, she bullied Hannah because Hannah didn't have any children.
Oh no.
Yes. Every year, they went to the house of God, to a holy place, to sacrifice to God and pray to him. It was supposed to be a really festive journey. But Hannah couldn't rejoice. For some reason, the other lady tormented and teased her all the time while they were on this journey.
Did she bully Hannah even though she knew how sad she was?
Yes. And then Hannah just got even more upset. In her despair, she went all by herself to the house of God to pray. When she was there, all the sorrow and pain just came out. She cried and prayed to God, telling God everything that troubled her. She hoped and believed that God would hear her this time. She made God a promise and said, God, if you can see how much pain your servant is in, and not forget me, but let me have a son, I will give him to the Lord for his whole life. There was a high priest who was in charge of God's house, and his name was Eli.
What's a high priest?
It's the chief priest, whom God has chosen and to whom God speaks.
Oh, yeah.
The high priest Eli discovered Hannah and saw that she was talking and crying, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. He actually thought Hannah was drunk. So he walked up to her and said, a bit strictly, that she had to go home and come back once she had come to her senses again. But Hannah looked desperately at him, explaining she wasn't drunk. It was just that she was in great sorrow and she had to ask for help from God. Eli looked at her and realized she was telling the truth. Then he said to her, "Go in peace. The God of Israel will give you what you have asked of him." Hannah was so happy. She believed Eli and went home to her family. Not long after, she had a son and called him Samuel. But she didn't forget the promise she had made to God, that if she had a son, she would give him back to God. It meant that she would let him grow up with the high priest so he could become a servant of God. When Samuel got big enough to go, she took him back to Eli.
Wait, didn't Samuel grow up with his mum?
He was probably with his mother for quite some time, and his mother also came to the temple and visited him. But from the story, it seems that Samuel himself understood why he was in the temple and he wanted to be there. He was chosen for it in a way, so God made sure he was okay.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Samuel grew up in the temple. He loved God and wanted to serve him. But Eli also had some sons who worked in the temple. They didn't really care about God and God's word, and they did a lot of evil things, even though they knew it was very wrong. God saw what they were doing and that they brought sin into the house of God, which should be holy and pure. God couldn't speak to his people in a temple where there's sin, and if God couldn't speak to them, things would go very badly with the whole country. But God had someone he could use. He had Samuel. One night, when Samuel was asleep, God spoke to him. "Samuel!" Samuel woke and sat up. It must be Eli calling, he thought, and ran into the high priest. Eli just looked at him astonished. No, he hadn't called him. Samuel went back to bed. "Samuel!" The voice came back again. A little confused, Samuel ran back to Eli. "No, I haven't called for you," Eli replied. "Go to bed." Once again it happened, and once again Samuel went back to Eli. Then Eli realized that it must be God who was calling Samuel. Samuel had never heard God's voice before, so he just didn't recognize it. "Go to bed," Eli said, "and if you hear the voice again, answer, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Samuel did what Eli said, and soon after he heard the voice again. "Samuel! Samuel!" He got up and answered, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Then God spoke to Samuel and told him about what was going to happen in the future. From that day, Samuel knew God's voice, and God continued to speak to him. Samuel became a great prophet in Israel, and everything that Samuel told the people came to pass. He continued to be faithful to God, and all that God asked of him, he did. We can also listen out for what Jesus wanted to say to us. And if we are to create peace where we are, then we need to hear what Jesus is saying and carry it out.
But we can't hear a voice like that from heaven where we are, can we?
It was a bit different in those days before Jesus came. God spoke that way to the special priests in the temple. But we don't need a temple to go to anymore. Jesus can speak to us in our hearts. He's like a gentle voice in here giving us good thoughts and ideas.
So if I get a good thought about doing something good, then it could be Jesus who's speaking to me?
Yes, imagine that. But we quickly discover that if I'm to be obedient to what Jesus says, I often have to stop doing what I want to do most.
Is that what's called denying yourself?
Absolutely. And if you do, you'll be very good peacemakers. And you are children of God, I'm sure of that.
I want to take care of the good thoughts and ideas Jesus gives me, so I can make peace too.
The children have been spending some lovely holiday days at Grandpa's small farm. Lily, Michael and Leo are making the most of these fine summer evenings to hear more stories about the heroes of faith. For the Bible explorers now know they can learn a lot from these stories.
I'm wondering how things are going with Alexander in my class.
Alexander? Is he the one who's feeling a bit low?
Yes. I don't think he's felt that good lately because there are some kids who tease him quite a bit. I've seen it many times.
Huh? What do you say when you see it?
No. I haven't really said much because I don't dare. I'm not very good at talking when a lot of people look at me.
Do you know what, Michael? I can understand that you feel that way. But we can learn to be brave so that we can say and do what we know is right.
Can we?
We can. It's something we have to practice, though. You've heard of Paul, haven't you? He wrote a letter to a young friend named Timothy, and in the first letter, in chapter 4, verse 12, it says, "Let no one despise you because you are young, but be an example to the believers in word and deed."
What does it mean to be despised?
It means that other people don't think much of you, and that makes me unhappy and lacking in confidence. Then I don't dare to do or say what I really should. So if we don't let ourselves be despised, it means we don't let the fear of what the others think rule us.
We should not let anyone despise us, but be an example.
Yes, I'll tell you a story about someone who probably practiced a lot with just that. And that's why she became a hero in Israel. She saved the whole country.
Oh, I want to hear that story.
What I'm going to tell you goes way back in the history of the Israelites. They are God's people, and God had promised that when they were faithful to him and kept the laws he had given them, he would bless them greatly. But that promise also had another side, because if the Israelites turned away from God and didn't care about God's laws and began praying to other gods, then God would have to turn away from them. And then the blessing would be completely gone and a curse would come upon them. The Israelites knew that very well, actually, yet they failed God. God chose some very faithful men to be judges in Israel to help Israel to do the good. God gave the judges wisdom and spoke to them so that they could make the people return to God.
What is a judge?
You probably know what a football referee is, don't you? He makes sure that the rules are followed, and if someone breaks the rules, the judge decides the punishment. Well, a judge in Israel decided in cases where, for example, some disagreed or had violated God's law, and in addition, they could hear God speak to them. So it helped the country to have such judges. But every time a judge got old and died, the Israelites started going off the rails again. God therefore had to curse the land. Kings in neighbouring countries began to take war against Israel, and especially a king named Jabin. He sent his commander with all his soldiers and chariots into Israel, and for 20 years they were tormenting the Israelites. It was a very difficult time, and God found almost no Israelites he could use to speak to the people so they could finally become faithful to him again. Then God did something really unusual for that time. He found a woman called Deborah. She was called by God to be a prophet and a judge in Israel. God could use her. I can imagine that many people found it strange, and Deborah probably had to choose not to care what others were thinking. She trusted God, and because he had called her, she did it. After she became a judge, she sat in judgment in lawsuits for the people of Israel. But she also knew well what was happening around the country, and she knew about King Jabin and his commander, who had been tormenting the country for 20 years. Deborah couldn't just sit and watch anymore. Was there no one in this country, of all the strong men and warriors of the Israelites, who could take up the fight against them? Deborah knew that God was telling her that this had to stop. Israel had to get this enemy out of the country. She was no warrior or commander, but she knew that if God was with them, they could win any battle. So she asked Barak, who was a brave warrior, to come and see her. She said to him to take 10,000 men to a certain place, and there they would lure the enemy in and would beat them with God's help. Barak replied, "If you go with me, I'll go. But if you don't go, I won't go either."
Huh? Did he want Deborah with him in the war?
He did. He didn't dare go alone. He probably realised that Deborah had a courage and a faith in God that was stronger than his. Then Deborah said, "Yes, I'll go with you, but then you won't be the one who gets the honour for the victory." Then Deborah prophesied that the war would succeed, but that the mighty commander of the enemy, of whom everyone had been so afraid, would be beaten by a woman. And that's exactly how it turned out. God was with them and made the enemy's soldiers and horses completely confused, so they couldn't fight, and Israel won a crushing victory. But the enemy commander got away. Barak knew that they had to find this commander-in-chief for the victory to be absolutely certain, so he set off after him and searched everywhere to find him. Then Deborah's second prophecy came true, for the commander hid with a woman who he thought would not be able to hurt him. But there he was wrong, for the lady killed the commander and the war was won. The Israelites could finally live in peace in their country thanks to Deborah's courage and trust in God. She didn't care what others thought, just what God wanted her to do.
I want to be just as brave and not care what the others think.
That's great, Michael. It starts with us deciding, and then of course we have to practice it. And when I think of myself as a servant of God, then I know I can trust that God is with me. And that's why I don't have to be afraid or sad about what others think. God is the greatest, most powerful and strongest, and I am his servant.
Then we can be really good examples.
After a lovely summer day, Grandfather has lit a fire and called Leo, Michael and Lily. They come as quickly as they can because a fire means a good time, and not least good stories. No one can tell Bible stories like Grandfather can.
It's really nice and warm here.
I was getting a bit cold, so this is really nice.
I love sitting around a fire.
Yes, me too.
This day has been absolutely perfect.
I feel like it's so easy to be happy when we are here. I don't think I've been grumpy once while we've been here.
Do you sometimes get grumpy, Leo?
It can happen. But sometimes it's more like I kind of get sad. At school anyway.
At school? How come?
Because recently, it's kind of been happening that people think I'm really lame because I believe in Jesus and what's written in the Bible.
It has?
It's just some people, but they say things that make me feel really stupid. It almost makes me want to just pretend I'm not a Christian, but that doesn't feel right.
I know that's no fun, Leo. You know what? Jesus actually told his disciples that they would experience the same thing, because the world doesn't want to believe, said Jesus. And that's why we who choose to believe aren't always understood.
Why did Jesus tell them that?
I believe he said it so they'd know beforehand, but also to tell them that they would get a huge reward when they choose to hold on to their faith anyway.
So you mean that we shouldn't be embarrassed because of our faith?
Absolutely not. I want to give you a Bible verse, which is a promise from God. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you.
To draw near to God, does that mean to pray to him?
Yes, that too. But it also means to fight for your faith, and to do that which is God's will. Then God will be very close to me, especially when I experience something difficult. Do you want to hear a story about someone who did just that?
Yes, please.
Once the king of Babylon attacked Jerusalem and took many Israelites captive. One of the men taken captive was called Daniel. He was taken as a prisoner to Babylon. Daniel was a special young man. He was very talented, and the king of Babylon quickly realized he could be of use to the country. Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were chosen for special training so that they could serve the king in the palace. The king had decided what things they were allowed to eat and drink so they would stay fit and healthy. But Daniel and his friends couldn't eat it because God had given the Israelites really special laws about what they were allowed to eat and drink. The food the king gave them was actually the best food you can think of, so it would seem very strange to ask for something else. But for Daniel, what God thought about him was more important than what the king might say, or what the others did. So he went to the man in charge of them and asked if he and his 3 friends could get the kind of food that God's laws allowed them to eat. Now God put a care for Daniel into the heart of the man in charge of them. He wanted to help them, but he was afraid that the food that Daniel wanted to eat wouldn't keep them as healthy as the others. And if that happened, he would be in big trouble from the king. Daniel trusted God and suggested that they try the diet out for 10 days. They would get vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then he could see how Daniel and his friends looked compared to the others who had eaten the king's food. When the 10 days were up, it was clear that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had become healthier and stronger than the others. God was with them and helped them so that they could continue to be faithful to God's laws. God also gave them knowledge and understanding about all kinds of literature and wisdom that they studied at the palace. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams. When their training was over, they were led before the king to be interviewed by him. And none of the other young men could match Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego. So they served the king. And when the king asked their advice in matters which needed wisdom and understanding, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm.
So when Daniel and his friends did what they knew God wanted them to do, then God helped them.
God doesn't forget anyone who wants to obey him. He will always help them. But the story doesn't stop there.
And what happened next?
The years passed, and one day there was a new king. His name was Darius. He was pleased with Daniel and the good job he did. He gave Daniel a high position in the country together with 2 others. But Daniel was much smarter than the other 2. For this reason, the king wanted to make Daniel responsible for the whole kingdom. The other 2 didn't like this at all. They were so jealous that they started to look for things Daniel could have done wrong in his work. But they couldn't find anything. Then they said to each other, "We won't find anything to accuse Daniel of unless we find something to say about the God he worships." They knew that Daniel believed in God and that the most important thing for Daniel was to keep God's commandments. So they made a cunning plan. They went to the king and said to him, "King Darius, may you live forever. We have all had a meeting and believe that the king should make a law that says, for 30 days, anyone who prays to anyone other than you, O king, whether to a god or a person, shall be cast into the lion's den. Make such a law, O king, and write it down." Darius didn't realize what it was they were scheming, so he sat down and wrote out the law they had suggested, and the law the king had signed could never be reversed. As soon as Daniel learned of the law, he went into his house and his room, and he had an open window that faced Jerusalem. 3 times a day he fell on his knees in prayer and praise to his God, just as he had done before. Then the men stormed in and found Daniel as he prayed. Now they had something they could go to the king with. Pleased with themselves, they went before the king. "O king, did you not pass a law that for 30 days anyone who prayed to anyone other than you, O king, should be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "Indeed, that has not changed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel doesn't care about you or the command you gave. He prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was in despair. He loved Daniel, and he didn't want him to die. He thought and thought about how he could save him. Right up until sunset, he tried to find a solution. Then the men rushed to the king again and said to him, "O king, remember that no law which the king has given and no decision he has made can be changed." Then the king had no choice but to say that they should fetch Daniel and throw him into the lion's den. But the king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you worship continuously, save you." And then they threw Daniel down into the den and closed the entrance with a large stone. Afterwards, the king went to his palace. That night, he couldn't eat or sleep. He was so restless because of Daniel and what had taken place. Early in the morning, as soon as it was light, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached it, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, hoping that he might still be alive. "Daniel, you are the servant of the living God. Has your God, whom you worship continuously, been able to save you from the lions?" Then Daniel answered from the bottom of the lion's den, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and closed the lions' mouths, so they didn't harm me. For I am innocent before him, and against you, O king, I have also done no wrong." their king was so happy and told the soldiers to lift Daniel out of the den. He came up completely unharmed, for he had trusted in God.
He wasn't afraid to say what he believed in.
The only thing that was important for Daniel was to stay close to God. No matter what would happen or where he was, he would do God's will. And God stayed close to him.
That's what I want to do too.
Yes, me too.
It's been another really lovely day on the farm at Grandfather's house. Leo, Lily and Michael have been playing all day long, but they've also helped Grandad with a couple of errands. Now the sun is sinking down behind the hill, and that means an evening by the fire.
Hey, Grandad, I've been thinking about something. Why is it if I give something to someone or bless others, I actually become happy?
Yeah, well observed, Lily. You know, it's because it's a law of life. He who blesses will be blessed.
A law of life?
Yeah, it's a law that God has laid down throughout creation for everything that lives. You may have heard more about natural laws, like if you drop a rock, it falls to the ground. But just as we have laws of nature, we have laws of life that God has determined. Whether you believe in God or not, you experience them.
Like being happy when you are kind to others.
Yes, but there's another law of life I'd like to tell you about, because it's perhaps the most important of all the laws of life.
Oh, we'd really like to hear that.
We can find it in the letter written by the disciple James in chapter 4, verse 6. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Okay, but what does that mean?
The first bit may not be so difficult to understand. God resists those who are proud, or you can say stubborn, those who think they know best. They just do whatever they want to do, and God can't give grace to a person like that.
What do you mean by give grace?
Grace. That is help from God. Without it, our lives would be completely destroyed, for we depend on God's grace and God's blessing to thrive.
It said that the humble, they get grace.
Yeah, absolutely true. Being humble, that doesn't mean having low self-esteem or hanging your head, but it means I've got to be completely honest and admit how little I understand about how I am. I don't pretend that I can do everything or that I know everything. Someone who is humble will learn from God and do his will. If I am humble, I also accept the advice of others. For example, you children, you need to listen to what Mum and Dad have to say to you and take advice. That is what is being humble.
Don't you have a story then, Grandad, about someone who was like that? Humble?
Yeah, I think so. I would really like to tell you about a man named Noah, for he was humble and he received grace from God. After Adam and Eve, there were more and more people on the earth. The years passed and more were born. At that time, people lived till they were very, very old, so eventually there were many people living on the earth. But as we have seen many times in these stories, men quickly began to forget God. They wouldn't keep God's laws and commandments, but they did what was evil in God's sight. Noah lived at this time. Unlike everyone else, he was someone who believed in God and who did God's will. It says he was a righteous man. But the other people did all kinds of evil. It was so bad that God was filled with sorrow and regretted that he created man. To put an end to all the violence and sin, God decided he would send a great flood. It would exterminate all life on earth and get rid of all the evil. But God hadn't forgotten Noah. He didn't want to let him die, for Noah was humble and obedient to God. God spoke to Noah and explained that a great flood would come upon the earth. He asked Noah to build a gigantic boat, an ark. He was to bring his family there when God told him. Noah had a wife and 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and they each had their own wives. God wanted to save all of them. But God also had a plan for the animals. In addition to Noah and his family, the ark was to house a pair of all animals and birds, so that the animal species could live on after the flood. With some animals, God asked for extra numbers of them. It was going to be useful when the flood was over, so that Noah and his family would get enough food. The ark was to have 3 floors. There'd be many rooms and only a single door into the boat. Boats may not have been common at all where Noah actually lived. But imagine it, without anyone else knowing why, Noah started building a huge boat on land. I can imagine that other people who lived in the area thought Noah was strange. Maybe they laughed at him. And building a boat like that is tremendously hard work. It certainly took a very long time. But Noah, Shem, Ham and Japheth didn't care what people thought or how much work it was. They did every single thing that God had said. In that way, Noah showed that he was very humble. God had said it, so he didn't ask questions or try to do it in a slightly easier way. No, he did exactly as God had said.
But how did they manage to build such a big boat far inland? How would they make it float?
For a long time, they built the boat on dry land. But one day it was going to float on an ocean larger than anyone had ever seen before. When the boat was finished, God asked Noah and his family to enter the ark. The animals and birds were brought in, as God had said, and they filled all the rooms. Then God closed the door. Just imagine what it must have looked like. One family and all those animals inside a giant ark resting on the ground. 7 days went by without anything happening. They were just waiting. But then, on the 7th day, something happened. The windows of heaven opened and it rained like no one had ever seen before. And not only that, the sea and the rivers and the streams of the earth opened up. And the whole earth was inundated with water. The flood had come, and it lifted the whole ark up so it floated. The water rose and rose, and eventually it covered all the mountains. The whole earth had now disappeared underwater. The ark floated alone on the vast sea. So for 40 days and 40 nights it rained, and then it became calm. All life on earth was gone, only those in the ark remained alive. God didn't forget them. He stopped the rain and sent a wind which drove the water back little by little. The water sank and the ark was stranded at the top of Mount Ararat. I don't think there were windows in the boat because Noah and his family didn't know anything about what it looked like around them. So Noah opened a hatch in the ceiling and released a raven. It flew back and forth as the water continued to subside. Then Noah let out a dove. But the dove couldn't find anywhere to rest, so it returned to the boat. Noah waited another 7 days and then he sent the dove out again. This time it came back with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. So the earth began to appear again. Noah waited another 7 days before releasing the dove, and this time it didn't come back. Then Noah and his family realized that the water had receded completely and the earth was dry again. God spoke to Noah and told him to go out of the ark. Noah, his family, and all the animals, now it was time for a new start. Once again, Noah did just as God said. Once he had left the boat, Noah built an altar to God where he sacrificed. God had saved him and his whole family. He had received grace. God saw Noah's sacrifice and gratitude, and he wanted to continue to do Noah good. He wanted to bless him. In fact, it says that when Noah sacrificed to God, God decided he would never again send such a flood of water over the earth. God gave a promise to Noah, and as proof of that promise, God created a rainbow in the sky. Every time it appears, it reminds God of the promise he made to his friend Noah.
So the rainbow is created by God, as a reminder that there will never again be such a flood over the earth. That's cool.
I think maybe Noah is my favourite hero of faith. Just imagine, he was that faithful to God, even when no one else was. He did exactly as God said. Really, he saved all mankind.
Exactly. He was humble, and God gave him a very special grace.
That's how I want to be too. Humble.
Then God will also give you great grace, and then you can be absolutely sure it will really go well with you.
Abraham, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you.
Many years had passed by since Abraham had left Haran with Lot and his household, and now some of them had started to become impatient. Where was this promised land?
Abraham, what's your plan now that we're here? After all, we're responsible for a lot of livestock and people.
Be patient, Lot. God makes the plans. We follow his will, and he will always be faithful to his promises.
Lot did not have the strong faith that Abraham had, and now his workers were starting to cause trouble.
Oh, hi. Our goats are hungry. Can we join you?
No. We were here first. Go and find your own grass.
But Abraham is Lot's uncle. Surely we can share.
No. There just isn't enough to go around. Now get out of here. You again? I hope you're not going to use up all the water.
Ha! There just isn't enough to go around. If we share with you, our goats will be thirsty as well as hungry.
Get away! Ha! Don't you dare!
That's exactly what I was talking about. But you're the boss. Maybe you'll have to find a solution.
God has promised me this land, and he will never fail me. Lot, are we in this together or not?
Sadly, Lot gave in to his workers' complaints. He decided to part ways with his uncle.
Please, let there be no quarrelling between you and me, and between my herdsman and your herdsman. After all, we are family. See the whole land before you. Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left.
Do you really mean that, Uncle? I mean, a promise is a promise, but...
The Jordan Valley to the east looks really good. I'm sorry, I just have to do what's best for my family.
Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are. Northward, southward, eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land, through its length and its width, for I give it to you.
Abraham, I just don't understand. How could you let them have the best land? What about us and our animals?
One day, God spoke to the prophet Samuel and asked him to go to Bethlehem. A man called Jesse lived there. He had many sons. God had chosen one of them to be the new king of Israel, and Samuel was to go and anoint the one he had chosen.
God wants a king with a pure heart who is faithful to him. And he's chosen a new one from among the sons of Jesse. I wonder who it can be.
Is that you, Prophet Samuel? What brings you here to Bethlehem?
You're Jesse, aren't you? Just the man I want. I have an important secret message from God. Call your sons.
Jesse gathered his sons together. They were all strong, handsome men.
This must be the one the Lord's chosen.
Do not look at his appearance or how tall he is. I have rejected him. People do not see what the Lord sees, because people see what is on the outside. But the Lord sees the heart.
No, the Lord hasn't chosen any of these. Are these all the sons you have?
There's still David, the youngest, but he's looking after the sheep.
You'll never guess what happened today. There was a bear.
Anoint him. He is the one.
What?
The Lord who looks at the heart has chosen David as king over Israel.
Nobody found out what Samuel had done in Bethlehem. When the time was right, God was going to replace the current king, Saul. But until that time, David was to continue being a shepherd with his father.
David, be careful. Remember, it's a real war, and our enemies, the Philistines, are dangerous. Take this food to your brothers who are fighting, but come back right away.
Yes, I'll be careful.
David thought it was exciting to be in the camp. But then something happened that would change everything. A giant from the Philistine army started to mock the God of Israel and their army.
Cowards of Israel! Choose one of your men to fight me. If he wins, we will be your servants. But if I win, then you will serve us!
Who is this Philistine who insults the armies of the living God?
He is Goliath. He's been doing this for 40 days. The king has promised a great reward, but no one dares to fight him.
That's terrible. Isn't there any mighty warrior who will fight for God's glory? I will fight, and God will deliver me from this Philistine.
Who do you think you are? You take care of the sheep. What arrogance!
Saul heard that there was someone in Israel's army who wanted to fight Goliath. The king wanted to meet him.
So, young man, I hear you have big words about fighting this giant. But you're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was young.
King Saul, the Lord, who delivered me from the claws of the lion and the bear, he will deliver me from this Philistine. God is with me.
Okay then, no harm trying, I suppose. Go and the Lord be with you. I just hope that young upstart doesn't cause trouble.
What's this? Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? Come here and I'll kill you!
You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord. Today, he will let me defeat you, and I will cut off your head, and then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and that the battle is the Lord's.
That David is certainly a warrior, even though he is so young. But I need him close to me so that I can keep an eye on him. I think I'll make him a commander in the army.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Should I fear anyone? No one!
In faith to God, David had defeated the great and fearsome Goliath. And this was the start of a new era for the young shepherd boy, the one who would one day become the king of Israel.